Welcome everybody to another edition of the Hurry Up. I'm your host, Adam. Let's get into this. So, Eli Manning does make the Hall of Fame. Sad day. I'm sure he'll get in at some point, but I think there's a lot of bias about it. I think the 500 record has hurt him and of course the elite status, because apparently he wasn't dominant enough in his era of football. And I want to just bring this up. Jared Allen, Sterling Sharp, and Antonio Gates. And I forget who the last person is, but those guys were deserving of it. They were elite guys. They did not necessarily all win the big game, but they were elite and went to the Hall of Fame. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I'm having a conversation with people right now about players, specifically in the NFL now. But let's use a guy like Antonio Gates and Jared Allen. So those guys were top of their position every year when they played, right? So when we talk about them, we don't ding them for not winning the Super Bowl. We don't ding them for not being able to get over the hump, do we? No, but with quarterbacks, we put in a different light. I have a friend of mine who's poo-pooing on Josh Allen. I think it's just haterade, but he's poo-pooing on Josh Allen because he hasn't won the big one. And I'm like looking at him like, but I can't take away his greatness throughout his career so far. Because when you do that and you label that this guy's a champion, he couldn't get it done, well, then Antonio Gates shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. Jared Allen shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. Sterling Sharp shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. And those guys were good players. They didn't always achieve the championship success, but were they not a good player? Were they not, a great player? Because they're in the Hall of Fame, can be great. So I'm not trying to put Josh Allen in the Hall of Fame just yet, but a lot of people do this in the NFL world and just in sports in general. We don't want to give guys praise, and we always move the goalposts. We're like, oh, well, that guy's not good. He hasn't won a championship, blah, blah, blah. And if we only measured guys by championship rings, guys like Hostetler and Trent Dilfer and Nick Foles, those guys would all be eligible for the Hall of Fame then. And I don't think those guys are anywhere near being Hall of Famers. But I can't take away guys who were good players, great players like Philip Rivers, because if you're putting in Antonio Gates, by the way, if you're putting in Antonio Gates, you're putting in Philip Rivers, because Antonio Gates is nothing without Philip Rivers. So Philip Rivers needs to get in the Hall of Fame to go with his tight end. But I'm not taking that away from him that he didn't win the championship when he has over 66,000 yards and all these other accolades that come with it. We can't keep doing this as fan bases, because what it does is it dilutes the actual achievements that these guys are making. Another example would be Charles Barkley. He went to a finals and he lost. Do I take that away from him because he lost to Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls? Joe Burrow went to the Super Bowl. Do I take it away from him that he's not a good player? Oh, he didn't win the big game. No, you don't. You can't. Why have a regular season if that's what we're going to do? Now, we can argue whether the regular season matters or not. It obviously matters in getting to the playoffs, because they don't just start with the playoffs. You have to have a record and everything like that to get there. So what I don't want to do, and I'm not going to do it, I'm trying to open my eyes a little bit more to when we actually had dialogue and we didn't have the internet the same way we did now, right? Because when growing up, when I was watching sports, we didn't have the internet. You had to appreciate a guy's greatness via the highlights that were sent out to you or how they talked about players. Now everyone has a gotcha headline, has this, that, and the other thing, always wants to compare somebody to this guy, or this era is different than that era. Yes, do eras matter? They do. But when we talk about greatness, you can't take away somebody's greatness because you want to fit a narrative of, I don't believe in this guy because he hasn't won the big game. And when you look at good players that are good players across the board, the only reason that I can see that you don't like Josh Allen is because you just don't like Josh Allen. It's not like the effect of Daniel Jones, and we're still getting articles here, and I'll get into that in a minute about Daniel Jones. But it's not like Daniel Jones or other players like Jamarcus Russell who have been bad and are just bad players, and you can tell that they're bad players. You're hating on a good player because you just don't like that player, or for whatever reason you're angry at him. You can appreciate. Listen, Kobe Bryant may not be a fan of many players, but you respect his game. Deion Sanders, same way. I wasn't always a fan of Deion when he played for the Cowboys, but I respected his game and understood why he's a champion, right, and why he was there. Guys like Champ Bailey, I use a guy that's not in the Hall of Fame. Great player. Probably should be in the Hall of Fame if he's not. Right? So you understand the greatness because they produced out there on the field. Larry Fitzgerald is not a winning receiver. Is he going to go to the Hall of Fame? Absolutely. Am I going to take away that he didn't win the big game? No. So when we really look at this greatness factor, we need to look at all facets of it. We can't just put biases on certain things and say the championships matter. Yes, will that matter in the greatness talk when you lead them up to it, right? And you don't want to loop in Dan Marino with Joe Montana. Sure, I get it. You want to say, oh, Montana won 4 and Marino only went to 1 and lost, right? But if you look at overall greatness, it doesn't take away from the fact that Marino deserves to be in the Hall of Fame and many other guys do. I'm not saying Josh, and this is not it's saying Josh Allen's a Hall of Famer. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying we poo-poo greatness to fit a narrative because we've all of a sudden say, up championships. And what that does is that's I hate to say use this term because someone used this term, weak argument. It just, all you're doing is trying to validate your argument by saying, well, he didn't win the big game. So you're trying to justify him not being great because he didn't win the big game when you're talking about the annals of greatness. Do I take away Andre Reed? He went to 4 Super Bowls, never won one. You know what I mean? Like and we can go from many players from many different sports and many different eras of greatness and not being there, right? Like, so we can't just say that a guy is not great because the team couldn't get over the hump. Did he produce in the games? Absolutely. Is it the fact that he played Mahomes on the other side? He can't play defense. And sometimes you meet a guy like Mahomes who is all world, who is the best quarterback of this generation's era, right? Since whoever has been watching football in that little time is era, and obviously has been great if you know the history of the game. But I'm not going to take away guys. We can have a debate all we want. That's what makes sports fun. But to poo-poo a guy and say that he's not good because they're the one the big game is just, to me, is basically biased, right? It's like saying, well, Lamar Jackson, he's cool, but he didn't win the big game. But the guy is in the MVP race every year. His team is constantly winning. Like, these are the type of things you talk about. And when you go to make his bust in Canton in a few years, you're going to say, wow, he was great. Unfortunately, he couldn't quite get over the hump to win that game, but is that on him? Right? And I think a lot of those things, and this is coming from a Cowboy fan, so he tried to tell me Troy Aikman. I'm like, Troy Aikman was good. Was he a prolific passer? No. Was Troy Aikman a good player? Yes, he was a good quarterback. In an era where he had a team, do I inflate Troy Aikman because he was on a prolific Cowboys team with Emmitt Smith, the best offensive line in football at the time, and Michael Irvin? Do I take away from his greatness? No. Do I think other guys have better stats that should be in the Hall of Fame? Yes. Do I think other guys can be in the Hall of Fame and still not win a championship? I do. You see it all the time. And I'm not saying Josh Allen's a Hall of Famer. All I'm saying is we need to look at greatness for what it is. And we need to not poo-poo it because you have a bias against some guy, right? Take away, you may not like the Eagles, but Saquon Barkley ran for 2,000 yards, all right? He's in a Hall of Fame trajectory if he keeps going. He hits a certain number, especially if he wins a Lombardi on Sunday. So I just wanted to get that off my chest. I should be a little bit more fired up about it. I'm a little calmer today because of this. But the last thing I'll say is I saw an article by Patricia Traynor that the Giants' situation with Daniel Jones failed. Look, you can say it failed, right? It didn't work out. Okay, great. But at the end of the day, the player was not good as well. If you look at Barkley, the Giants knew how good Barkley was. He goes to the Eagles and shines. I don't think Daniel Jones is going to have the same, effect on his team going someplace else. I just think he's not a very good player. It's nothing against Daniel Jones. It's just that's who it is. And to tell me that, to just solely blame the Giants always for his troubles is not a valid reason and not a valid argument to me, right? There's always two sides of the story. Unless it's like in relationships, there's always two sides of the divorce if it happens. Unless you know for a fact one side was beating down the other or really keeping the other held down, that is not the case in this relationship with the Giants and Daniel Jones. There were still good players. I mean, you look at Malik Neighbors, right? Giants absolutely are garbage, but Malik Neighbors is still having 1,000 yards, 4 different quarterbacks. So what? So then what validation? What are they doing to Malik Neighbors? The Giants don't win in the next 5 years. Are we going to say the Giants are doing Malik Neighbors dirty? No, they're just going to say the Giants sucked and it's unfortunate that he's on the team. Same thing with what we said with Barkley. However, when it came to the quarterback, we changed that argument up to, hey, the Giants are doing Daniel Jones dirty, as opposed to maybe Daniel Jones is just not as good as we think he is. And I think that goes hand in hand with what we're talking about now with terms of greatness. And my last point I will make about greatness and what we do is Calvin Johnson. Am I taking away the fact that Calvin Johnson's the Hall of Famer because he dominated the league and didn't win a championship? You can't do it. It's just not fair to that player, and it's not fair to the game, because when you do that, you take away things because you're being a hater. That's it. Now, you can hate players during your time. You're allowed to do that. You're a fan. But when you sit back and you realize and you look and everybody in the peers is telling you that this guy's an MVP and you're just not seeing it, I think that's more on you than the actual player. And that's my rant of the day. Okay? That's my rant of the day. Hopefully you guys get to see this and you can comment how you want to comment. But that's just how I feel about when we talk about greatness, when we talk about players like, Josh Allen and how they're framed. You don't have to like a guy to respect this game, but respect the game because that's what we're doing. You may not like him that he plays for the Bills and you're like, whatever. And I think some people let that hatred skew their view on what is going on. I think it happens in politics all the time. I think it happens a lot in many different avenues. And I think it happens with content creators as well. I think if you don't like whatever a person has to say, you're not going to like that person regardless. So no matter what they say, you're going to hate on them. And that's just that's just what we've done because of how social media, how the media, how we ingest information happens now. A lot of headline reading and less article reading. And when you read that article with that gotcha headline, it really doesn't say much other than, a few phrases here and there that might be relevant. Other than that, it's a gotcha headline. So I advise everybody to sometimes appreciate what's in front of you. Like, I'll give you an example. I understand LeBron James is great, and you can debate whether or not he's the number one or number two, whatever, right? I think Jordan and a few other players are better than him, but he's a great. He's going to be a great. But I'm not taking away from the fact that he's playing in a different era. I can't, because if you do that, then LeBron James would not be in the same conversation as Scottie Pippen and all these other guys, because those guys would dominate in this era right now that they're playing in. They would be even better than they already are. So I can't say that with LeBron 100%. But what I can say is in his era, he was the best player on the court. Or one of the best players on the court. Again, when you debate greatness, it really is just personal bias at that point. At the end of the day, you know that person's great. But I'm done rambling. Again, that's my rant of the day. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'm going to try to bring you more segments like this. And I hope you're enjoying it. Have a great one and enjoy the Super Bowl, folks.